Hello everyone, this is Jotto and welcome to another deck tech. Now this is a deck that I got top 5 with last week. I have been going back to university, so yeah, been a little busy. But trying to get my schedule back on. So for streaming I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to kind of abide by. I haven't made my mind up yet, because I know my actual schedule now for my classes, so I've kind of got to shape it around that. So in other words, I don't know yet, but you'll hear more from me on that note. So anyway, what am I covering? This is Burning Rage. Yes, the deck that sort of died off a little bit, but Crazy Rage just wasn't working on ladder because it just loses to a lot of random stuff, and the win rate was not high enough to actually climb, because you need higher than 60% usually to climb. And in this case, this is a deck that can actually win against almost anything. It's not that it will win all the time against anything, that's definitely not the case. However, it is a lot more consistent, and it has the capability of winning almost any matchup, meaning that if you play better than your opponent, you can actually increase your win rate proportionally and then climb up to where you should be on the ladder. So anyway, first things first, the namesake, Burning Rage. Now, Burning Rage is a card that has not been around a lot recently. Basically since the expansion, pretty much. And the reason for it was because there was a whole bunch of extra rush stuff that came out that was just more powerful than playing the long grinding game of Burning Rage. Which is kind of astonishing, because Burning Rage plays one of the stupidest grinding games you'll ever play. So basically, as long as you stay under 4 cards, you get infinite draw and ramp. It's just ridiculous. And there are definitely ways of controlling your hand size, which essentially allow you to negate the drawback of Burning Rage most of the time. Now, you can make mistakes that result in you not being able to control your hand size, and then you take a bunch of extra damage, and you can kind of tell the people that have played Burning Rage decks more from the ones that haven't, because the ones that haven't may get a little bit greedy when it comes to spells and take like 5 damage for no reason, and they lose the game like 5 turns later because they're on 5 less life than they should have been. So yeah, but the card is incredibly powerful. If you control your hand size correctly, it gives you ramp and an insane amount of draw power. Incredibly, incredibly strong as a card. Bit vulnerable to Unicorn, but outside of Unicorn, there isn't really any other way of destroying it that is heavily played. There's Ray of Righteousness, but that's a 3 mana for 2 mana investment, so that's not fantastic. And then they don't have their Ray anymore. And there are other Ray targets in this deck. So yeah. Ray of Righteousness not so much. It's pretty much Unicorn. So Burning Rage, very, very powerful card. Now, before we get onto any of the interesting stuff, we still have our core Rage aggro stuff. Talked about this with Crazy Rage, but you kind of need to run it because you need 1-drops to be able to drop your hand size, and often you just get free wins by going 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, attack, attack, attack. It just happens. So you still want to play your 8 1-drops, your 8 2-drops. Now, what are we playing? Well, there's only the 8 1-drops you actually can play. You got the Lizard Barbarian, the 2 HP option that has the bonus attack when attacking the enemy, and then the Goblin Warrior, which only has 1 HP but can also be used in trading more efficiently. Now, both of these have their strengths and weaknesses. Goblin Warrior is very, very vulnerable to stuff like Fire Blast and weakness emblems. However, it also doesn't get trumped by the 2/2/3 speed like bodies that are present in a lot of green decks. So they both have the strengths and weaknesses, and it often depends on matchup. If your opponent has a lot of ping effects, then Lizard is better, and if your opponent doesn't have a lot of ping effects and is relying more on creature combat to remove your stuff, then Goblin Warrior is better. Now, there are some interesting tricks you can do with the Lizard Barbarian against Force Mage Protector in particular. If you have a Lizard and also a Goblin Warrior, then you can use the Lizard to fully absorb the hit from the Protector and take out the shield, and then use the Warrior to kill it. So you can actually trade 1 for 1 and gain a bit of tempo against Protector sometimes. Protector is still a problem for Rage, but not as much as it used to be because of Lizard Barbarian and also the Tortured Orc. So yeah, on to the 2-drops. Speaking of the Tortured Orc, yep, as it turns out, a 2/3 2 speed is really good for 2 mana. Yeah, the drawback does come up a little bit. Not that often though. Usually you don't want 2 in play at once, but the first one is so powerful it's just absurd. And you want it so often that you just want 4. The card is insane. It really is insane. It looks so innocuous, but it's just ridiculous. like, big vanilla stats have always been underestimated at first glance, but you don't need a crazy ability to be playable, and Tortured Orc is definitely an example of this. The 2-3 just doesn't die to a lot of stuff. I mean, it basically only dies to Assassinate and... what, Fireball early game? That's not even a good trade. Soul Flames, I guess, but then they take 3 damage. So, yeah, it's pretty much Assassinate is what your opponent's got against Tortured Orc nowadays, and anything else is a tempo loss or is much later in the game. Like, Consume Spirit will technically kill it for 2 mana on turn, like, 5, but I'm not really going to count that. So, yeah, on turn 2, Tortured Orc is usually just a tempo boost and is incredibly irritating to deal with, and is one of the reasons Rage is so strong in the early game right now. Now, the other 2-drop is Fireworker. For Fireworker, Fia doesn't do that much anymore, so I've just cut it from one of my Rage decks. 1 damage is not a lot nowadays. However, Fireworker, not as good as Tortured Orc, but the Artifact Destruction does come up occasionally. It does come up against Vamplamp in particular with this deck. Unlike Crazy Rage, you actually do need the Artifact Destruction, and it comes up mostly against Lamps, occasionally against Helms, but mostly against Lamps. That's your main target for the Fireworker. So yeah, watch out for that, but besides that, it's pretty much just a vanilla 2/2/2 speed. So, what about the rest of the creatures? Now, this is the bigger stuff, the more mid-rangey stuff that really changes how the deck plays. So, we're only playing 2 of the 3-drop, which is Kar. Yes, haven't played a deck with Kar yet. Kar, the Deadly Flame. Now, 2/3 3-speed is surprisingly annoying to deal with. This is kind of something that came up on Library Guards a lot, and also Silverblade Warrior, where 2/3 stats always look a little low, but at 3 speed, it's so annoying to deal with the 3 HP, and the 2 attack is just enough to snipe stuff, so it's just the perfect stat total for creature combat, pretty much. And what happens when he gets outclassed? Well, you got that second ability that makes him to a 4/4 flying, which means you can put him on the back, and then give him the boost next turn and attack immediately. Kar is incredibly good. Like, he looks kind of... nah, he's always been a bit of a big investment. I mean, he has 6 mana to get that ability to go off, and then he's only a 4/4. But it works really, really well, because we're playing Advanced Zash. It does 3 damage to everything, so Kar dodges it. And also, he can attack into Guardian. Yep, if they don't have a Namir in play, he can actually attack into Guardian, which is kind of impressive when it comes to early drops. So yeah, he can attack into Guardian, he shuts down Word of Grace, and if you have a Kar at 4/4 that's already hit them, well, what are they going to do? They have to Ray it, pretty much, right? They have to Ray the Kar. But Burning Rage allows you to just maul all of the angels, just kill all the 6/6s and 3/4s with the hero power combos, because you have all the extra cards. So it's actually really hard to deal with Kar for angels, and it can be really rough. So yeah, Kar, very, very powerful. The life gain limiter, you'd be surprised how often this comes up. It mostly comes up against Dominion and Rage, but occasionally against things like zombies or corruption decks in general, running the Word of Pain Succubus combos. So yeah, it just does come up. Not against everything, but against a lot of stuff, the effect does come up. Now, on to sort of the big late game punches. We've got 2. Now, we've got Erelak. He's the new one. 3 Erelak. Now, Erelak is generally something that comes down a little bit later. You often want to curve into Phoenix, then play Erelak later. However, 5/5, 2 speed, pretty large body on him. The Unstoppable is quite handy. And his secondary effect only comes up normally when you can activate his last ability. It does sometimes come up when you go Erelak into Hero Power, but that doesn't often happen. It kind of does, but you won't be able to swing with the Erelak normally, because they'll have taken him out since he only has the 2 speed. But when you get that third ability, you have Erelak in play, and you've just wiped the board, you play Erelak next turn, they have like 1 creature, they can't kill him, then you go 4 levels, and you can just start whirlwinding all the small stuff, and taking out his entire board, and hitting really heavy. And that's what Erelak Warborn is in the deck to do. He's basically like Dragon, and the reason I'm not playing Dragon, I'm playing Erelak instead, is because Dragon is really clunky. Like, it is incredibly good against green. Incredibly good against green. So, yeah, they don't have Landslide anymore. They only have Tornado. So he's actually really, really good against green decks. So it is a bit of a messicle, but if there's a Helm anywhere near the metagame, you don't want to be playing Dragon. And that's pretty much why I'm playing Erelak instead. He's a bit quicker, And he actually helps against Rage as well, because Dragon is often way too slow in Rage mirrors, whereas Aerolak comes down, he brick walls the entire board, and then he just Dragon fires them every single turn. Like Flame Serpent will deal like 5 damage, Aerolak will deal like 9 or 10, depending on whether or not he's been blocked at any point. So an Aerolak will actually just flat out race Crazy Rage sometimes, and the only efficient way of dealing with him is Flame Serpent. But then at that point, you basically just gain 5 life, so it's worth the trade either way, since you have better creature quality and card advantage than they do. So yeah, Aerolak, pretty good. Not as good as Phoenix, but pretty good. Speaking of Phoenix, Phoenix is kind of the Rage signature creature at this point. Phoenix is incredibly strong. 3/3, 3-speed, flying, one of the most irritating bodies in the entire game to handle. I mean, we've seen with Guardian, 3/4 with flying and 3-speed is incredible. But Guardian you can interact with inefficiently, but you still can by attacking with 3 creatures and then taking it out of the picture, meaning that its effect is both an upside and a downside depending on the situation. Most of the time it's an upside, but there is definitely a discrepancy there. Whereas with Phoenix, you lose that extra life, which is actually kind of a big deal because you're playing Advanced Ash, but the rebirth ability is just silly. It also means that if it gets helmed, you pretty much lost the game. So, yeah. Well, I mean, you can deal with the Phoenix afterwards, but it's hard. So that's why, yeah, 4 Fireworker kind of comes in there. But Phoenix is an absolute beating. It's so hard to handle, and it also means you can often use it on attack and on defense sometimes, where you can attack, trade with the Phoenix, and then when it goes through its rebirth, you actually have it unexhausted to block. It also means I have done really random things before, like fireballing my own Phoenix so I can block something that I couldn't kill with the fireball. Doesn't come up much, but it has come up a few times. So yeah, Phoenix has a lot of play to it, and is an incredibly powerful creature. And the way that the levels and mana work, you can actually go, say, Burning Rage turn 3. So you can go 1 drop, go up Altar, and then go like Burning Rage, and the next turn you can go for like a Fire Blast something, or like a Car, and then Phoenix. So you can actually ramp him out sometimes, which is insane. Ramping out a Phoenix is not a fair thing, and is definitely one of the reasons to play Burning Rage, is the fact that Phoenix is so powerful. So that's it for the creature suite. So we've got our standard early game, and then we've got a little bit of extra heavy hitting punch when it comes to mid-game creatures that Rage just seems to have nowadays. I mean, Phoenix always was there, but now Car is an early drop that hits heavy late game, and Aerolak is a mid-game drop that gets a lot of damage potential late game since he pumps your entire board. So onto the spell suite. Now this is pretty basic at this point. I mean, we've seen this Rage spell suite a lot. So we've basically got our 4 Fireball, instant removal, and it's also burn. So yeah, 3 damage, 3 mana. Pretty staple at this point. The instant is what really makes the card, and the fact that it can go face actually does help. Means you can often burn people out from 13, or usually 8 in this particular deck, but 13 is definitely possible. 3 Fire Blast. Now, this has gone up recently, just because there's a lot of creature decks around, but this varies up and down depending on the metagame. If there's more control, you bring the number down, you get the idea. It also works really, really well against Angels in particular, because the Advanced Ash Hero Power plus Fire Blast completely wipes out all the Angels in play, because you can Fire Blast Nantriel and then Hero Power, and then everything dies because the Guardians will take 1 damage. So yeah, Fire Blast plus Hero Power is 8 mana, wipe anything Angels can put into play pretty much. And not even Spell Warden stops it, because you can use the Hero Power to wipe out all the Spell Wardens. So yeah, Fire Blast is really, really good in combination with the Advanced Ash Firestorm Hero Power, which is very, very powerful in of its own right. Now, besides that, 3 Word of Fire. This has become pretty standard recently. For a long time it was 4. But Word of Fire can be a little clunky sometimes, and also with Burning Rage, yeah, you don't want to be drawing too many cards sometimes. Word of Fire when you've got 3 Burning Rage in play, I've done it, it's not fun. Yeah, I mean, on the plus side, you can scale the damage on Word of Fire really, really high with Burning Rage. I've hit with Word of Fire for about 5 or 6 before. The problem is you then have to drop your hand size afterwards, which can be tricky. So yeah, be careful with Word of Fire. Don't get ahead of yourself. You may actually kill yourself if you've got multiple Burning Rage in play. But the card is still very, very powerful, and if you have a Burning Rage in play and only one card in hand, and it's Word of Fire, well, you just drew up to the 4-card limit again, pretty much. So, yeah, very, very good card. Now, besides that, 3 Dragonfire, not 4 because it's not a full burn like deck. We're not playing Flame Serpents or anything, but still pretty handy. I have actually used Dragonfire as removal a few times, but having the reach is really nice. It lets you basically get free wins against clunky starts sometimes, where you just go 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, and then just attack a few times in Dragonfire. That does happen. And against control, sometimes you can go Burning Rage starts into Phoenix, and then they Cataclysm. You still get some damage in with the Phoenixes, and then you can Dragonfire to just end the game after the Cataclysm. So yeah, very, very handy. And I have gone up and down with the numbers. I do quite like 3, but again, it's a bit of a metagame call whether or not you need the 4. Depends on how many control decks are around. Now, as for the shrines, we are running 18 with 3 altar. Now, I'm running 3 altar, not 4. 4 felt really bad. So you're already running 18 shrines with 3 skill shrines. Yeah, that's a bit sketchy. The reason for it is because you can often miss Divine being a good thing because of Burning Rage. So it drops your hand size. But Altar is borderline broken in this deck. Yeah, it's very silly. Now, one thing, watch yourself. Don't get screwed by Car. Yeah, that's something that catches you out at least once. Yeah, if you need the burn, Divine Offering your Car or play it first. If you need the Fireball effect, get rid of your Car, because otherwise that's just going to screw you. But, yeah, it's not Red Dragon, so it's not even like it's a consolation prize. So, yeah, Divine Offering Car away if you want to use the Fireball effect. However, 2 mana, turns any card in your hand to a Fireball, and it's on a 2-turn cooldown, which is incredible. And besides that, it allows you to drop your hand size while using removal, which is really big. If you have Burning Rage in play and you've got 5 cards in hand and you've got a Fireball and an Altar, you're not going to Fireball because then you might take some damage. Or if you have 2 Burning Rages in play, then you're taking 4 damage because you go up to 6 cards and then you take 2 from each. Well, you're not going to take 4 damage just to burn something, so you can Altar instead. You go down a card, you go down to 4, which is the limit you want, and then you just take out the threat. It also just works really, really well with Firestorm because Firestorm plus Altar is 7 mana, deals 6 to one thing, and then 3 to everything else. So yeah, Altar is incredibly good in this particular deck. So yeah, that's a basic rundown of the deck itself. Now, as far as stuff I'm not running, I did talk a bit about dragons. That's mostly to do with Dominion. However, Dragon does have its moments. It really does. It's really good in the long grindy games. It's amazing against Order. Order has some serious issues with Dragon. So does Nature. It's mostly just Dominion that doesn't. Like, Dragon's really good in the really long games, but to give you an idea of how awkward it is sometimes, you need 12 mana because you go Dragon, 5U, and then kill the dragon because you don't want the dreaded Helm with a Vampirism in play, which basically means you've just lost the game because they'll Helm, and then they'll use it, gain 5 life off the ability, refresh, use it 2 more times, and you're either dead or they're on like 25 life. So, yeah, Dragon's a bit awkward there. And there's not much you can do about that with Fireworker either because it all happens at once and you can't respond to it. So yeah, Dragon's very, very awkward there, and Erlac does allow you to get a little bit of extra punch in the mid-game, so you don't need Dragon as much. I'm trying to think, besides that, the rest of the 3-drops, Gibber and Ronnie doesn't really work that well in a deck with Erlac, and it also doesn't provide any late-game punch. That's the other reason I'm not running the Fire Warrior, or whatever he's called. The 3-2. The 3-2 target emblem guy. That guy's pretty good. But again, he doesn't add any actual late game punch, and Card does. And the ability to turn your 3-drop into basically, I mean, you got 4 Phoenix, 3 Erlac, that's 7 main threats pretty much. You got 7 main late game threats, and then you got your Dragonfires as well. And the cars basically add 2 more to that little suite of threats there. And Car actually hits really hard. Like 4 damage per swing at 3 speed, that hits harder than Phoenix, and it usually hits harder than Erlac as well, because Erlac can be more easily blocked. So Car is ironically the heaviest hitter in the deck half the time. I mean, Erlac is the big finisher really late game, because then if you've got 6 mana, you can basically Whirlwind the entire board, clear everything. You keep your Phoenixes, you keep your Erlac, and you keep your Cars, and they all hit for an extra damage each. So the Aerolac, like if you have a Phoenix, a Car, and an Aerolac in play, the Aerolac with the ability, basically you deal 2 damage to everything, and then the Aerolac himself is worth 8 damage. So yeah, Aerolac hits very, very heavy late game. The only problem with him in the mid game is that he's a little easier to interact with. And not having flying means that you can't just put him on the back row and get snipes off, which is the reason why flying is so powerful. Like, flying is possibly the most underestimated mechanic in the entire game. I think it probably is, because it always looks a bit like it's not a combat stat, but it really is. I mean, deadly and ranged and such are a bit more tangible when it comes to combat stats, but flying pretty much is as well, because it allows you to pick your battles, whereas if you don't have flying, you have to stay on front row, and it gives the attacker the advantage. Just having one 3-speed flyer in play basically negates the attacker's advantage entirely, which is just crazy. So, yeah, I mean, even a 2-speed flyer is really, really rough to deal with, let alone 2 or 3 3-speed flyers. That just dominates combat. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why Burning Range decks are so good in general right now. Alright, that was a long queue. Okay, so we've got 1-drop, 2-drop, and then we've got removal and a Phoenix. Only 1 shrine, but this should be good enough. I'm going first as well, which is nice. The going first, going second thing, you do prefer going first, obviously, because it's a rage deck. Going second's not as bad as it is with, say, Crazy Rage, but it's still a bit rough. Like, sometimes you can go, like, 1-drop, Alter, Burning Rage, and you only take 1, and then, like, 2 turns later you can go, I mean, not 2 turns, next turn you can go Spark Phoenix. Okay, so we're going to start with the Lizard. Now, he could have a Summoner Druid Opener, which could be really awkward. I'm going to get rid of the Fire Blast because there's a higher chance I draw something else I can play before I play the Fire Blast. Now, this could be either Hate or Care Bears. It's kind of hard to tell. And by hard, I mean basically impossible. Like, I won't know until he plays a Corruption Shrine or a Order Shrine. Oh, that's a really weak opening. Okay. I think any of the other openers could have been really, really bad for me there. But that's a pretty weak opening. Ancient Treant's going to provide somewhat of an issue, but besides that, I think pretty much everything else is okay. There's the Corruption Shrine. Okay, so I'm actually not going to go up the altar here. He could have Gurkha. He did play a Gurkha, though. Alright, we'll just do it like this. Nah, it's fine. I've already got the altar for level. I've got 3 altars in the deck, so I don't actually need to use this one particularly. Especially considering I'll be relying on altar less in this game because I can't rely on Burning Rage as much in this matchup. Now, I've got to watch for Flesh Sculptors, however this does mean he doesn't have Instill Life, which is nice, so I don't have to deal with as many trees. If he has another Gurkha, it's kind of rough. But he does take up his entire turn, pretty much. Yeah, of course he had it. Okay, so now what we do is move forward, fireball this. I'd actually rather have the draw right now. Because as I said, I'm not going to rely on Altar as much because I have, well, I've got 3 in the deck total, and also I don't really want to be using it until I've got Burning Rage. Yeah, I'll just fireball this. Don't want to take damage if I don't have to. And he didn't have another play. Now, this could be a Tornado Outbreak. And I can actually go Burning Rage plus a 2-drop here, which I think is better. The reason I prefer this play is because I'm basically forcing him to have Alter, and yes, he does have Tornado. I'm basically forcing him, I'm not convinced about tornadoing this, but yeah, I'm basically forcing him to have Unicorn. And if he doesn't, well, I've got Hero Power up now, which is huge, and I can still go Phoenix next turn, even if he does Unicorn this. So it leaves me in a decent spot, although, I mean, now he does have Tornado. I mean, I know he has Tornado, but there's not much I can do about that. Interesting. I think I probably would have just traded and then reverenced, to be honest. Alright. Alright. See if I can get an Alter at some point. There's an Erlac. Okay, I'm just going to get 2 threats in play. So he can lock down the Phoenix with the tree. And then trade. Because if he doesn't do that, then I can do my own trade and then Hero Power and wipe his board. He is down Tornado, but he's only got 2 cards in hand. He needs a Unicorn, basically. Yeah, he needs a Unicorn at some point. Because I can just keep playing massive threats. Like, Erlac is a huge problem for Hay Bears. You basically have to lock it down or do nothing. Oh boy, the Flesh Sculptor. Yep, that is a problem. He's not reverencing. Could mean he has a Tornado in hand. Alright, so we get 2 more plays. He does not. One of the things about playing Bears decks is you really do need to hold on to cards sometimes just to get the reverence going. But yeah, Ancient Treant attacking is normally a death sentence for Rage. But in this case it's not too bad because I have 2 separate threats that can kill it effectively. Oh boy. Okay, this is gonna get rough. So I think the idea here now is that we've got to take out one of these Flesh Sculptors first. I mean, he's only got 4 in the deck, so if I take out these 2, then it's not as bad. And I do have Firestorm, so I can take out multiple at once. Oh, the Unicorn as well. Okay, that's really rough. Yeah, there's not a lot I can do about that. Although this attack doesn't do anything anymore. He actually can't attack. But if he doesn't attack, then what does he do? Like, think about it. If he doesn't attack, then I get an Erlac and a Phoenix attack, so he can't do that. So what we're going to do here is I could trade off the Phoenix and then go attack, Hero Power, which would wipe out everything, I think. It also wipes out my own board, pretty much. It's not too bad, though. I basically take out the entire board state. Well, unless I miss Divine Offering there, and then the game's just over, but that's just how Spellweaver works sometimes. Alright. So that wipes out the entire board apart from an Erlac. So yeah, I keep my Erlac, and he loses his entire board. Okay. Now, I did just put 2 Burning Rage on the bottom, so I'm probably going to count cards to see if I can get them. But yeah, Unicorn's really rough. Really rough for this kind of deck. I do have an Erlac in play now, though, and I've got the double activation on Erlac. Potentially. Which means I can actually just wipe out this board entirely now. No, I still can. If I get a shrine. I'd rather have the fireball. I don't want to miss divine or even risk missing divine. This also just deals an extra damage. Well, it deals 2 technically, since I don't have to attack through the 2/1. I'm probably going to lose the long game, so I just want to leverage this Airlock. Like, I don't want to deal with a board state where eventually he gets back in the game, so I'm just going to keep dealing damage with Airlock and see if I can go the distance. Yeah, so that game was just weird. Like, I mean, the games versus Hate Bears are a bit grindier in general. They just tend to be, partly because of like Unicorn, but you also have the method of actually dealing with these bigger creatures now. Which, I mean, that game basically showcased how powerful Airlock is when you get the hero power set up with him. Because at that point, like, the reason he resigned there was because it's kind of like, what does he do? Because I've got 6 mana, well, okay, I technically had 7. But yeah, I've basically got 6 mana for the ability. So I can double Whirlwind the board every single turn and hit for 6. And there's basically nothing in green that deals with that. I mean, what does he do? Tornado Outbreak? But then I just replay him, like, a turn afterwards. And then I also have the hero power, which means even if he gets a huge board state, like, by the time he could Reverence again, I would have 8 mana. So I could go hero power Whirlwind, which actually deals with every single creature in his deck. So at that point, the game was pretty much just over. So yeah, Airlock, he's not as good as Phoenix, but he does have his moments. He is a very, very heavy-hitting mid-game creature, and I would not underestimate this guy. I mean, I replaced Dragon with him just because he's a little bit quicker, and he's a little bit better at dealing with the big board states earlier on in the game, whereas Dragon can just be out-tempoed a lot of the time. Like, Airlock still can, like a Tornado and an Airlock hurts, for sure, but a Tornado and a Dragon is brutal, because you actually have to have 4 levels to even play him. So yeah, pretty much that's the Airlock versus Dragon thing, although it is a metagame call, as with a lot of things when it comes to deck building. Now, besides that, in terms of other potential cards, I mean, I've talked about a lot of them, but things like the Anarchist, I still don't like this guy. He just wipes your own board a lot. So yeah, Anarchist doesn't really fit in a lot of cases. Gibber and Ronnie doesn't work with Airlock at all, and often having the 1 HP creatures is a liability nowadays, which is the reason why Gibbo's been cut from a lot of lists. Raki's a bit more of a sort of go face, go face, go face, and at that point you really need Blood Frenzy to use Raki properly. So then you'd have to put in Blood Frenzy, and that's a bit more of an aggressive style. So when it comes down to the 3-drops, Carr I think is definitely the pick. But yeah, outside of that, there's not too much else. Again, Forced Labor, you do need the Blood Frenzy to make work. I think the only other card I have actually tried was Battle-Scarred Elder. Now, Battle-Scarred Elder, he's actually not bad. He is decent. He's basically the red Library Guards. He's not as good as Library Guards, but he's basically the red Library Guards. Now, the reason I'm not playing him and I'm playing Phoenix, Battle-Scarred actually doesn't die to the hero power, which is nice, and he usually draws a card. But Burning Rage is your own draw engine, and you're playing 4. So yeah, Burning Rage kind of compensates, and Phoenix is just more imposing. Having flying is huge, having 3 speed is huge, and it's just way more of a board presence. So having Phoenix is simply more powerful than Battle-Scarred. And the only other thing you could play, you could play Battle-Scarred over Airlock. That might work. Actually, if you don't have Airlock, try Battle-Scarred Elder. It may actually function pretty similarly. He doesn't hit as heavy, but he definitely helps in those games where you just don't have Burning Rage or you lose Burning Rage. So he's not a heavy hitter like Airlock is, but I don't know, 4/4 is still decent. Like, 4 damage is still a decent chunk every turn, and he still survives the hero power, so probably still a decent choice. However, I just prefer Airlock nowadays because he just hits heavier. That last ability in Airlock really does help when it comes to closing out games. So yeah, try the Elder if you don't have Airlock, but I would probably recommend playing the Airlock Warborn instead. So that's about it in terms of Burning Rage. Now, overall, the matchups are not all favorable by any means, but most of them are within 60 to 40% win rate, which means it feels like you can win any game, or you could lose any game, depending on how you play. which is one of the reasons I love playing these decks. Yeah, I really hate playing decks that have set matchups where it's just like, oh, okay, I'm dead. Or free wins or things like that, because it takes a lot of the decision making out of the game. So I actually really like playing decks that have matchups that flow a little bit more. And Burning Rage and Bear's decks are two of those archetypes that actually do have a bit more sort of middle of the road matchups, and a lot of it comes down to individual decision making as opposed to just straight up matchups, which is kind of refreshing, especially right now where the metagame is pretty much, okay, for lack of a better term, it's pretty much just aggro and Cataclysm. But there is a couple mid-range decks around, but that's more of like a calculated matchup thing as opposed to a meta staple. But we'll have to see at the end of the month, and also we'll probably get a balance patch by then. Maybe. No idea if we will, but we probably will. Just knowing the patterns of the devs, we will probably get a balance patch by the end of the month, and then we'll sort of see how the metagame plays out by Masters mostly, because Ladder is always a little bit easier earlier on in the month. And by a little bit, I mean a lot. Like, it usually gets harder in the last 2 weeks, and the last week is when you see the actual metagame shaping. So, yeah. If you look at the Ladder and like, oh my god, it's 10 Coronas, take it with a bit of a pinch of salt, because it's the last week when people actually do play at their best, and that's when you see the actual metagame. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any feedback, want to ask me any questions about the deck, put it in the comment section below. If you want to support the channel directly, there is a link to my Patreon in the description, along with a gold code for new players that also gives you the Disquisitive Spirit Card Back that you can see on screen. But now, it's been Jotto, signing off.